Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Bootroom. Today we've got a special guest all the way from Australia. It's Ryan Genrich. Okay, Ryan is currently a team assist. He's also moving. Sorry, we'll start that again. We've got Ryan Genrich on. He's the owner of Team Assist and also has another company of Mindfulness, which is a mental health clinic and studies in psychology. He is also the head coach of the Queensland University of Technology in football. He has a major in skill acquisition and movement control. And it's a really interesting talk. It's going to be 45 minutes, possibly a little bit longer. There will be opportunities for you to ask questions at the end. I'm sure Ryan has got loads of knowledge in this field and can share it with you throughout. But I will now introduce you to Ryan. So, okay. Good morning, Ryan.
Morning, Craig. Hi, guys. How you doing? Obviously, can't reply. So it's 9 o'clock here in Australia, 9 p.m. I'm currentally in my office in the hospital. So if you hear a buzzing with a nurse station and a number, it's because we're in a hospital. I currently have twins at home and they're asleep, so I didn't want to wake them. So that's why I look like this as well. So yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you, Ryan. I mean, obviously taking your time out, especially on the other side of the world, is, you know, it means a lot for Stephen Gerrard Academy and LLS to have you on board and share your experiences of the football movement. And I met Ryan when I was living over in Australia and when he was working for Brisbane Raw. And I just thought what he did was amazing in terms of movements with the kids and the players. And, you know, it was totally different to sports and science than it is here. So it's really interesting. And I'm sure that Ryan will be able to give you something to take away from today's presentation. So without further ado, Ryan, if you want to share your screen and we'll be able to.
So I think you've disabled me.
Oh, have I? Yeah, hang on 1 second.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay, can everyone see the slideshow?
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah, perfect. So thanks for having me on. Smattering of applause. So I'm basically called a football fitness coach or a football movement coach. So it's kind of a interesting title. So originally, I started in football playing. I played at semi-professional level here in Australia, went to Italy for a little bit for trials and got injured, come home, and then started to study sports science. Didn't want to be a physio as such, wanted to be on the pitch, did PT as well, and basically related to footballers. So a little bit about me. So yeah, I'm the head of strength and conditioning at Brisbane City for 5 years. We would call that football movement. Help create or assist, hence my business name is called Team Assist, because we're only a part of the performance, and generally the head coach is the head of performance. I know around the world sometimes head of performance might be the sports science team, but at the end of the day, if you're under Jose Mourinho or coach from overseas or head coach, they're the head of performance. So we're just a part of that. Same with the physio. And yeah, kind of have to remember that they have, at the end of the day, even though you might specialize in a certain area, that they have full control. So I got picked up by the Brisbane Raw, which is a professional A-League club, where Craig and I met at the inaugural academy. So I was there for 2 years previously at Brisbane City for 5 years. So I helped assist 32% of the Raw Academy, hence why they got me on board for the football movement. Or I spent 2 years. We won the youth league, which is the youth professional league. Helped assist 2 A-League contracts, play overseas to Cardiff, and assisted as well as in the coaching side as well. So I've been in the game roughly 12 years, all levels. I mainly work in the foundation and the development phase, but I do a bit of the performance phase. I'm not too sure what they call exactly there, Craig, but mainly the younger kids. Go on, sorry.
No, kind of the same. Yeah.
And so I currently am the director of or head coach at QUT, so university. So they cut our funding at the Raw, and obviously the specialty coaches kind of left. So a few pictures of the players that we created. So that's us in the orange. There's a few Australian players. My qualifications. So as mentioned, major in motor control and skill acquisition, Bachelor of Business. The reason for the business was to be able to understand working with other coaches, which was really interesting, because when we first started at the Raw, there was a Spanish coach, Jose, who's currently at Bordeaux Ladies. He's doing well. Some of the other coaches went on to coach, one was the director of Melbourne Victory and the goalkeeping coach, and progressed on. So that really helps build rapport and communicate, which is a big part of interacting with players and coaches. So I have some undergraduate qualifications in athletics, strength and conditioning, Pilates, coaching, which is coaching football, which is, I think, the most important part, a bit of psychology, and some PT there as well. So what is football movement or football fitness? So it's really clear that we break down the wording, because sometimes what happens in football and all sports is that you may get a sports scientist, and I believe we've got one listening, which is great, but they might not relate it to football, and they might not be from football. So the key word in football fitness is that the football is first and the fitness is second. So what can happen is that you don't get buy-in from footballers, and to develop that connection. And it also doesn't relate to how football actually thinks and moves together as one piece. So you might see some personal programs online, which is popular through COVID, and it might be a gym program specific for football. However, there's no football involved. So therefore that would just be athletics or strength training. So I picked up the idea actually through Southampton, through their setup, and a little bit of Ajax and Club Brugge as well, and just really focused on creating motor patterns for players that's specific to their area, their unit, individually how they play, their style of play. Movement is defined as the moving parts of definitive motion and action. So this is really interesting. So originally I called it football movement, or we called it football movement. I didn't create the term, but a movement is actually without an object, and an action is with a ball or a weight, and an interaction is with something in the environment, so yourself and another player. So I've written there a 2v1 or 11v11. So the reason for the 11v11 is because we always want to use football as the reference. So I used to be able to run 100 meters in 11:15, which is fast. However, how is that relevant to football? And as I'll mention some stats as we go along later on, and specific to certain areas as well. Fitness is actually how quickly you can recover, both physically and with your brain through psychology. So Craig and I had a chat previously during the week, and we were talking about timing of movement and timing of the thought. So maybe you can think about you as a player through this session that I'm delivering, or if you're coaching or a professional who may be a good mover but doesn't influence the game of football as much as they could. So they might be, can you still hear me, Craig?
Yeah, we can still hear you.
Yeah, okay, perfect, yeah. So somebody moves really well, but doesn't influence the game as football as much as they should. And influence is obviously to score or help score within the unit or prevent scoring, because that's the aim of football. So we've got to keep that in mind. Yeah, so why is it important? Well, it affords you the ability to influence the game as an individual in your unit, off the ball and on the ball. So for instance, good example, Barcelona. Everyone likes to talk about Barcelona. They might have the best players recently. And those players have good actions, but why weren't they performing or aren't they performing? It's actually because of their interactions between each other. So that's how we focus our session on football movement, actually have a kind of a top-down model, always relating to the game and then your movement within that. And it's really important that we use objective reasoning. So when we watch a game of football, people can have their own personal view of the game. And a team may win, and this is really, really popular with formations, for instance, and kind of fads in football and key words and stuff like that. But it has to be relevant to the game, and try to find a reference. So, for instance, for the sports scientists who's listening, an average of Harry Kane when he runs is that he runs 11 Ks with a sprint and without a sprint. But how much of that is he influencing the game? So we have to make sure that it's relevant to the game. So sometimes people might just go and then run 11 Ks, but how are they actually moving within that context? So it's we try to create references as we go along. So for instance, here's an example. So why didn't Usain Bolt become a professional footballer? He's mechanically the fastest person in the world ever, and apparently played at a younger age.
Was it Sydney United last year?
Central Coast Mariners here in Australian A-League trialling.
Here's Usain Bolt. We'll get an early look at his speed. Almost one-on-one there with Consoni, the goalkeeper.
So there you can see scan, his first touch, etc. So mechanically he was good, but he may have not had the speed of thought. So why don't we call it strength and conditioning or sports science? While that still is a part of what we do, I think the wording is really important, and that also relates to whether it's physiotherapy or any of the other roles, psychology as well. So sometimes psychologists may like to jump in and use their terms, but it's irrelevant unless it relates to football and is used with football communication. So so we're trying to increase a mechanical variable, but objectively it has to relate to the level 11 game. Sports science can focus on with GPS tracking is a big fad at the moment, and it has its place and it's contextual as well. So for example, with youth development in skill acquisition phase, I think at Blackburn, if you correct me if I'm wrong there, Craig, but I think they call it the foundation phase.
Yeah.
Then
so we have the foundation phase,
yeah. So in Australia, we call it skill acquisition phase. So we may see parents or coaches using GPS trackers to track a 11-year-old or a 10-year-old's how much they run, when that's irrelevant, because if they were just working on how much they run, they would go do athletics or another sport. So the football has to be relevant to the football and the game of football. Yeah. In terms of...
I saying, Ryan.
Yes, sorry.
I'm just saying when it goes back to that skill acquisition phase, and obviously it's still probably the same here. You know, the parents want the best for the players, so they see the smart technology. They see the first team players wearing these bands and these heart rate monitors, and they think that's what their child needs in order to become a professional footballer. So it's really interesting, because I remember when I was at Brisbane Raw, and one of the coaches there, he said, how many 1v1 situations is there? And I said, well, there's defender from the front, defender from the side, defender from behind. And he was like, yeah, but there's one more. And I said, and I couldn't think of it. And in the end, he turned around, he said, running onto the ball with that defender coming across you. And I guess that's where that leads into this football action part, in terms of where's that, how do you apply that running style and being able to change direction and use your body to keep players away and stuff like that. Am I on the right track?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, so basically at that phase, and yes, I'll do it with a performance phase, but generally, if you're in the first team at Liverpool, then the sports scientists are going to be tracking or focusing on one, how strong you are, how often you move, whereas in the foundation phase, we're looking at how you are moving, because you could move incorrectly with change of direction, or holding a player off, or taking your first touch and running with the ball, as we'll see later on. I have a topic here with a player I train at a professional youth level. So can we break that down? So in Australia, we have 4 key areas in skill acquisition for football. So it is first touch, running with the ball, striking the ball, and 1v1s. However, they'll have hidden learning, they call it. So tackling and heading is a part of that. But they don't focus on or have any hidden learning within the physical side of when you are taking your first touch, how is your action of your body when you are running, and can we influence that when we coach? So they might do it separate through athletics or getting a strength and conditioning coach in. However, it's very rarely, I'm generalizing, it's very rarely with the ball, and then again with a player or opponent and the ball. So it's basically skill acquisition for movement with football. Yeah, and football is the key part there, because if we put it the other way around, it would be for movement and fitness, and football happens to come after that. Yeah. If I talk too fast, guys, maybe send Craig a message.
No, it's all good.
Hopefully you can understand my accent as well. So how I basically break that down into concepts, and there might be different words used by your coaches, or if you are a coach. So speed of thought and mechanical speed. So an example would be a great speed of thought would be Xavi or Iniesta, for instance. Mechanical speed, maybe a Aubameyang or Gareth Bale might sit in the middle of that. So can we create both? Because we all know that if I can move before the opponent or time the action, then I'm going to be quicker and influence the game. So I created, so I wanted to be a bit interactive, because that's kind of how I coach as well. That I want people to fail and have randomness in their training, and have an aim. And the reason for that is, as in biology, as mammals, us here, what we focus on is generally how we improve our football actions. So I'm actually in a psych hospital, and when we train someone with bipolar, going a little bit off topic, but has relevance, or someone with bipolar or schizophrenia, and they may be medicated, then we always come back to the action, and the action is the exercise. So the way we used to break it down at the Raw, and when I move on to other clubs, is that the coach will, and the analyst, I work hand in hand with the analyst, they will video the game, and they'll get feedback to the player, and we will design the session back to front. So if we had to put fitness first, what would have happened? We would have not related it to the football. So with a player, and I'm going to talk about Ben Braunstoffer Halliday later on, coaches will get feedback for the player on can you take your touch past the shoulder of the player to get across or score. So how do we break that down into the movement patterns with and without the ball? And then create interactive learning around that. So we have to relate football to that. So I use a model, as you might have heard it, is a bit of an antagonist. His name's Raymond Verhagen. So he's a Dutch coach, psychologist, and he runs World Football Evolution. And I've learned probably the most about what I do from him in reflection. So originally in Australia, when I coach, we talk about perception and scanning, but communication is a big one, verbally and non-verbally on how we play. So if I am going to, I'm Jordan Henderson and I'm making a forward run, can I put my hand in front when I accelerate first and then have good running technique? And we need perception around that. Then the decision making and the execution is actually last, and how that relates to the movement side. Well, then that forward run that you might have been talking about before, Craig, from one of the parents or the coaches, is the last phase of the football movement. So if I receive the pass and I move a player, and then I communicate and scan, play again, and decide and recognize that the space is beyond, then can I see my movement on how I run. So that's mechanical speed. Speed of thought, and this is really interesting in the way we design sessions for football movement. It's got to be sophisticated, have situation action patterns of movement, direction, and speed. And it has to have an external focus. So the reason I believe for part of my success of creating or assisting creating players, because I didn't create them, they created themselves and they've learned from everyone, is an external focus. So very rarely will we do isolated movements in terms of just say an arm swing. We may do it if they can't do it within the session that we're designing, because if you think about when you play, there are so many external forces of the referee, the game, your girlfriend or boyfriend's in the stand, the opponent and the rules of the game, etc. So can we design the session to have randomness and lots of external focuses within that? So what will that look like? Well, just say if you're going to do a 3v3 rondo or 3v3 plus 1, whatever it is, then we may give a focus on planting your foot, or a big drive phase when you take off, because everyone wants to be faster in football. And if we do forward runs beyond that, then what does that look like, and how can we mechanically improve to take off? And it's not just speed, it could be strength or change of direction, whatever it is, to increase learning, especially from a younger age. So at home, possibly if you could write down your weaknesses and your strengths as footballers. Am I correct in saying that most of these guys and ladies, Craig, are footballers and not coaches? Is that right?
Potentially, there's some. They would have played football at one point in their life, I'm sure. I think if they could drop it in the chat box, it'd be good.
Yeah, that'll be great.
Yeah.
And then happy for you guys to send me an email, and help design a session on how you can improve your movement patterns with the ball and specific to your area, whatever it is. Yeah.
So sorry there, Ryan. If everyone wants to just put in a strength and weaknesses of, is it their football? What was the question again? Sorry, Ryan.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah. So in a football context, so of their football movement. So you might be a centre back and to say, I need to improve on defending the space behind. So can I work on turning and then accelerating, whatever it is. Yeah, that relates to movement and football and movement. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Yeah. So common problem. How can you improve acceleration? So this is another kind of fad term, acceleration. I'll explain why. To create more goal scoring opportunities. What I do here in terms of, I'll define acceleration, I'll define the position and what we are actually trying to do, and who we're relating it to on the pitch as well. So it's really important that we design the session to improve. So Ben, who I'll move on to, is a left back. So how can he create forward runs to score, which was some of the feedback from the coach at the Brisbane Roar. Ben actually does it really well, but the Australian coaches are looking for even more attempts at that. And then I break it down to the interaction between the players and the movement. What is actually the movement that we're looking at? So we're going to look at that last, whereas an S&C coach or a sports scientist may look at that first. So I did a player profile on Ben to give some example. And we still use sports science in football movement or football fitness. However, it's just a part of it, and the strength and conditioning. So important to know who's in your unit. Is left back. We're going to talk about speed strength continuum, and I'll get you guys at home to send that through to me as well, to see where you fit on the speed strength continuum, and I'll explain what that is. What your age is and your gender, because that also defines how we train and affords us different things. The feedback from our coach. So previously I spoke about objective and subjective. So someone watching you play may say that you need to do X, Y, Z better, where that's kind of that's subjective, and you have to take into account what's actually happening with the data as well. So we do talk about the data from sports science to move to influence the game, and that's really important. So a major difference is Drew Sherman, who was my academy director, is now at Melbourne Victory, worked at Southampton. And I think Liverpool and Southampton have a good relationship of creating players, or Liverpool using Southampton's academy players. And it's really interesting because when I first started, we're trying to have a point and a quantitative point, so quantitative meaning number, and an end line for my job. So can we do a T-test or a yo-yo or 11K run or a 2.4K run, or can we deadlift our body weight or whatever it is? However, that's important, but what's important is if it's relevant on the pitch. So if you can actually see a difference on the pitch. So he said to me, well, I said, how will I track it? And he said, well, we'll see the players improve on the pitch. So you'll visually see them because that's the reference is football. So sometimes we can get taken away to other places. And we'll give some examples of that later on. Yeah, so mechanical challenge. So Ben, arm swing, hip extension, and you'll see me cueing this in when I do a little bit of my session. And how can I combine the two together in a football context? So from the coach was pressure from the side from a defender. So it's really important that we apply those techniques of arm swing and hip extension with a good first touch and pressure from the side and make the right decisions. So hence why it's football. Yeah. So we combine all those together. Yeah. If I move too fast or too slow, just let me know.
Yeah, no, that's good. So in terms of these player profiles, Ryan, we're actually doing this with our players at the moment with our head of football. So it'd be interesting if we could get some type of copy of that and put that out and see if there's any.
I just I've simplified it and I can put that in. It is. Oh, excuse me. I'll just start that again. Oh, still see me? Okay, so this is the context that we're talking about. You see me okay, Ben? Craig? Are we there, Craig? Cool. So Ben is the left back here. Yeah, so can you hear me, Craig?
Yeah, I don't know if it's me, lost signal. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah. It just went off there for a bit, but.
Oh, okay, perfect. Yeah. So this is Ben. So he's, as we spoke about, 17, just turned 18. Originally, I've had him for 4 years. He come with me with Brisbane City. As I said, assisted to create lots of the players at the Royal Academy. And this is a clip of what we had been working on, and it happened to come to fruition in the game, as you can see right at the end, to get an equaliser. So I'll break this down. So when we get to the training session, it's really important that we understand on where we are on the pitch and how our movement relates to where we are on the pitch. So as I'll go through, I'll get you guys to think about what are the main actions that you do in your position. So as a left back, we are always facing inwards. The pressure is very rarely behind us. Why? Because there's a sideline. So the movement is always laterally. And then he obviously reads the... Oh, I'll get back. Yeah. He reads the pass and communication. And what I'm looking at is his first touch, his hip extension, and his elbow swing. So this is how we are actually running, not how often we are running. And I'll break this down with him. And then obviously he gets past the shoulder of the player. And here we can see he's got toe up, knee up, focus on the ball. Cool. Okay, so I mentioned mechanical speed. So to physically get faster or stronger, what happens is it's called a continuum. So speed plus strength equals power. So just have a think about who is a player with just speed, who is a player with just strength, and who is a player with power. And how do you sit on that continuum? Obviously, it's not black and white, and you can sit within that. If we're going to compare to another sport, which we generally don't, but for the sport scientists in the room, where would baseball sit on that line? Well, baseball would be more strength speed. Why? Because we are holding a bat and a ball, which is required for strength, and then swinging that bat. And then positions can be across this. So where would a goalkeeper sit? Where would a centre midfielder sit? Where would a winger? And your style of play within those units helps define how we want to train. Overall, generally, a footballer would be speed, strength, not strength, speed, or power. Obviously, like powerlifting or Olympic lifting, pure. Yeah, cool. So I've done some really definitive players in those areas, and maybe you can think of some Liverpool players. So Di Maria, speed. Why? Because he has very little physical strength. Obviously, he's a professional footballer, but in terms of the other spectrum, as I said there, and those combined, obviously quite a specimen. Traore in the middle there, power. So how does that power compare to, say, power lifting or Olympic lifting? Well, obviously it's relative to football because he's continually training and relating it to football, and it's genetic as well. Yeah. Cool. In terms of windows of opportunity. So this is really really interesting, and how we train the body to improve in an actual skill, and in terms of skill acquisition, or the foundation phase, or as we progress. We can see that ladies or females progress earlier, and there's windows of opportunity for speed, and it's really evident when you play or coach, and you might see kids and they kind of look awkward. It looks like they have a pattern from their brain that's not hitting their peripheral nervous system, so their limbs, and they kind of look like Bambi or a newborn calf or something, right? So their movements are going laterally. The goal is to go forwards, because the connection from the brain, as we spoke about, is first, and then the body. So they're recreating that, obviously aerobically, strength, and then boys are a little bit later, and we can see the performance phase there. So maybe at home you're 16 or 17. And how does that relate to when you're a bit older? Obviously, you can still improve these areas with and without the ball. And we've got athletics there. This is taken from the Australian Athletics Association. But it's a little bit slower because we don't have brown fat of the brain, but we still can improve it. Cool. So I want you to think of your common actions. So this is how I all these models here are how I help design sessions to improve the players. So if anyone at home, I know you can't reply to me, but how often do we touch the ball within 90 minutes? So I think the average is, depending on the team, obviously, and the style of play and the tactics, is roughly around 3 minutes. Or of that, how often would a goalkeeper touch the ball? I think it's less than 30. So if we go back to the speed strength continuum, well, they're a power athlete. So how can we design a session to improve that with the ball, without the ball, and in the gym? For a left back, I've just put some that I think. So defending the space to the side, behind, and these can be all combined. And I'll give an example: defending the cross, breaking lines, playing forward, overlapping runs to create goal scoring opportunities, which is what we're working on with Ben in this topic, and staying in position, etc. As we're younger, in the foundation phase, there's certain skills that we want to develop as well with the body and with the ball, as we spoke about. And they're foundational skill patterns, and they are crawling, running, walking, jumping, pushing, pulling, and lunging. So what happens is there's a bit of a breakaway in thought of coaching in terms of sports science or S&C, that we don't want to over specialize too young. We want to develop a foundation first, and then break away. Some examples are Gareth Bale. I believe he did cross country. We had Zlatan before in strength, and he's obviously quite mobile with his range of movement of his hip. And he did taekwondo and football. Ajax are known for doing jiu-jitsu or judo with the ball. So they will develop training sessions around BJJ or judo on how to hold a player off and use their weight against them. So we really want to start to then progress our training and our periodization of our training through the years. To be a bit more specific, we can start really wide from a foundation phase and then progress onto there. Because as we said, in a game, how often are you doing certain actions, and what can you do to be world class at those? So Messi only really does 2 skill moves and a variation of those. Neymar will always scan or perceive the space. If he comes short, he scans the player, either doesn't come with him, then he can spin and turn and then do his skill moves or play forward or shoot. If the player does come, he's known for spinning into the space behind. So they're common actions that he does. And that's how football relates to the movement. So him spinning and turning into the space behind and understand the communication of the defender and how that relates to him with the pass and the interactions, as we spoke about with Barcelona or Manchester United increasing, or Liverpool going on their great run. Cool. So what is some common data around actions? So I spoke about before that you may want to improve mechanical speed, but on average, or acceleration. And in Australia, there's actually a company, I won't say the name, but it's in the name, that is around improving speed. And they will say we will improve speed for footballers and their franchises. However, there is no ball. They train on a court, a basketball court. There is no opponents. And the average we change direction is 17 meters, and the maximum which change direction is 40 meters. So thinking about that and our mechanical speed and speed of thought in designing session. So I've asked here, is running for Ben from the Brisbane Royal Youth important for him to afford him space to get the cross or the shot? It is 100%. However, there is some things that we need to do first, is to recognize the space, him moving laterally, and the timing, so the communication of that, and to decide where to go and when to go. And I mentioned the goalkeeper there. Cool. So this is a session that relates. My analyst actually had a hamstring injury, so he'd normally join in on the session to create an opponent. So this is training. So it's a similar action, and we'll progress to crossing and passing. He's communicating with his hands. If I open my body shape, it's going to split away, react to the color. A little bit false because it's cones, and there's no cones in games, but it represents space. Ideally, we'll have another player, which is the analyst. And here I'm going to give an example of mechanical speed of me taking off and extending my hip and using my elbows, which we spoke about before with the cross. And we do progress to a cross here as well. And as we can see, he's moving sideways across the body. And in my field, what's really interesting is Instagram and social media, and we get caught up on what looks good or what actually influences the player ourselves or the player we are coaching, and how we can get the result of scoring and influencing the game. So we can do lots of cool things. However, it may not be relevant for that player at that time of their age, how old they are, how they move, and what their goal is. Cool. As I mentioned, we still use strength and conditioning and athletics and sports science within it, but it has to be relative to how we are physically moving, when we're, how we're communicating in the time and the space of the pitch. So an extension of that in the gym would be Olympic lifting. So when I train the different players, whether at team assist or at the university QT or at the Royal, it would mimic in the gym similar to create a similar action from the brain to our peripheral nervous system, so central nervous system to our peripheral nervous system. So Olympic lifting does hip extension, and we can pull our arm through on that for a perfect example. We also have to understand that we all have challenges and sports and occupations. We may be a surgeon or a hairdresser, and we might be doing a knee arthroscopy or cutting someone's hair. We're going to develop some kind of challenge or disorder with our body that influences. So for instance, a cyclist is known for being quite round and kyphotic, which is rounding of the back through the thoracic spine. Ben is quite like that, so we try to pull him back a lot when he plays and in the gym. However, we need to have those adaptations of the body to do what we do. So quite common, I think originally Cristiano Ronaldo used to have a lot of poke neck. Common injuries are groin, hamstring, Achilles, and what we may need to do in the gym to prevent that is posterior chain, so lots of glute work or whatever it is. And you can send me a question around that to help your football from the gym and on the pitch and your position. Cool. And then I've just said you can design your own session. That'll be great. Send it on through to me. I'll take the time to go through it. Keep it nice and simple. I'll try to keep it nice and simple for you guys. Yeah. So hopefully some takeaways. You can identify your football actions, the interactions in your unit, key positions, your speed of thought and mechanical speed to create better actions for your movement and your style to influence the game. So yes, you can go for a 20K run and you are training and that's creating a foundation, but are you influencing the game with your movement with and without the ball? Yeah, cool.
Thank you, Ryan. That's great. Well done. Really good information in them slides. A lot to take away. I'm sure if you wanted to directly email Ryan, he'll be able to give you some feedback in your current position. I think that's important. So we've got a couple of students who've put on the chat about when you asked about strengths and weaknesses, centre back. We've also had a centre midfielder role. So that's coming from Adam and Owen. So, there is questions out there. I'm sure that they'll want to touch base. So if you want to put your email address in the chat box, I'm sure people, but if anyone would like ask any questions, do you want to put your hand up? Anyone want to ask any questions for Ryan? Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Just give it.
I have a question, Craig.
Yeah, go on, Andrew.
So you mentioned that. So your whole kind of profile on was it
Ben,
on Ben? So you obviously identified issues with some of his movements. So is that the same for every player? Do you go into detail with every single player in the squad, or do you focus on ones that need the most work? How does that look? Do you put to the specific session you showed us with yourself and the player? Do you put them on for all players?
Yeah, so that's a good question, Andrew. It depends where we are. So when I was at the Brisbane Roar, I looked after 94 players. So it also depends on how much time you're afforded, and understanding that the football coach wants to work with football themselves. So one, I would start with the player, start with the group, and what I didn't mention, and maybe there's coaches in the room, that the movement pattern will relate to what they're learning. So just say if they are learning running with the ball, or a game training situation of sideways pressing when there's an overload out wide by the 7-Eleven, whatever it is, and that coach, I think Jake Goodship's coming on, or has he been on, Craig?
Jake's potentially coming on the next couple of weeks. He's been busy with the women's football. Apparently they've come out of COVID and stuff like that. So
they will send me their session plan first, because it's always about the football. So they'll send me what they're working on, and then within that group of just a squad, I will work backwards. So I mentioned that I work backwards rather than working forwards. So if I worked on improving mechanical speed, or something specific, take off or drive phase when you run, that might not relate to what the coach is trying to achieve. So what I'll do there, Andrew, is then remembering that out of roughly 94 academy players, roughly 3 will become professional. So yes, we have to try to improve the lowest common denominator, but we also have to improve people's strengths as well. So I will do both. So I'll take the group, and then I'll pull someone aside at the academy level that's highlighted, or if they're going away to nationals for the Australian team like they did, or I had some girls go to Feyenoord, for instance, then we'll work on something specific for their area that's really going to set them apart if they're trialing, or they've got games, or it may be tactical as well. We played Japan, and we might have worked on something specific to play Japan, and they set up in a 4-4-2 diamond, and we played 4-2-3, 4-2-3-1. So how can we create movement around that relates? Does that help, Andrew?
Great, yeah. As well, so you mentioned that you do it as a like general with the squad sort of movement stuff, and obviously link that with the football curriculum. So do you have like a team of staff that help you do that, or is it just solely yourself that works on kind of the football movement, or do the analysts get involved?
Thank you. Honestly, at the Raw, at the time, so I finished up when I was there for 2 years at Brisbane City. It was myself because of funding. So in Australia, obviously it's not as big, but at Southampton or Liverpool, they'll have one or a sports scientist and a S&C for possibly each age group. What do you have at Blackburn there, Craig?
Unmute yourself, Craig.
Sorry, Ryan. What was that again? Sorry.
Yeah, so would you have an S&C coach or a sports scientist per age group at Blackburn, or what are they for?
We have a department at Blackburn. So basically, they have a head of S&C, and then he'll have 2 other. There's Josh, who's head of S&C in the academy, and then he has 2 other part-time staff. So they work within in the groups. So how it will look would be there'll be a session, and there will be a coaching session, and they would take the group of, let's say, my group, the under-10s, take them out, and they would do basically an S&C session for 25 minutes, and then you come back into the session. It's not ideal, but that's the way it runs.
So Andrew, a little bit different, and obviously it depends on the philosophy of the club and the academy and what you're trying to produce, and within that model. So every club will have a different philosophy, and you're trying to relate to that. Have I lost Andrew there? Are we all good?
No, I'm still here. Craig's just made your video bigger.
Oh, okay. Cool. Yeah. So I personally will just work on my own at the Raw, and then the analyst would give me feedback from the sessions, and the coach, we may get students in, but at that point in time, I would do it myself, and then pull out individuals within the group. But generally with the week, what would happen is they would have their warm up, and that's a good time to work on something specific, or at the end of the session, if it needs to be a little bit more isolated, we could do that, injury prevention, or whatever it is. It really depends on what we're trying to meet. But individually, I did that myself. A lot of work, but I love what I do. Obviously.
I've got one more before anyone else wants to ask any. So I know you mentioned that a lot of clubs and teams, they grab you with the technology, so GPS, video, etc., but don't do a lot with it. And I know you mentioned people throw around the distance covered metric a lot, and it obviously doesn't show you much within the game, and I completely agree. So what metrics do you think? So GPS obviously can be useful when it's used right. So what metrics do you think that are more specific to football, and have you used them to kind of inform your decisions?
Well, it's contextual. Yeah, it's got to be contextual. So depends on the age, and depends on what they're working on. So it has their place 100%. I'm not saying it doesn't. It's just at the younger age, it won't. But if you remember, it's all about influencing the game. So what is actually happening in the game? So we have to watch the game, and as we broke it down there, the reference is always the game. So can we see what is happening, and then work backwards from that? Yeah. So if they are, so the metric might be something qualitative rather than quantitative. So do you play yourself, Andrew, at the moment?
Yeah, try goalkeeper.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Yeah. Football's for everyone. Yeah. So, and what position are you?
Goalkeeper.
I get. Okay. So obviously your biggest metric is what? Not conceding, right?
Well, yeah, of course.
Yeah. Well, that's number one. So, because the aim of football is to score. So, then if you're a goalkeeper, then obviously I'd work with the goalkeeping coach. It was Tom Fordry, who was at Barnsley, I believe, and now he's at Melbourne Victory. Is incredible, and we work together with that, and we work on the starting position, how you start, how you communicate, where you are losing the ball from possession. There is some goalkeepers who lose possession, and then in the A-League, I can think of some, I'm not going to name them, who lose possession and then make great saves, and everyone says they're a good goalkeeper, but is it relative to the team and the tactics? Well, no. So, yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, that's okay. Did that answer the question? Sorry, I've gone different.
Yeah, so it was just around the technology and how you kind of use it. And I suppose one more, if you do use GPS at the Raw, how do you use it? I'm guessing you use it only for the older age groups, rather than the younger ones.
Yeah.
So do you use GPS, so Catapult, Player Tech?
Yeah, they use Catapult. I'm not too sure what they use now because I haven't been there for 9 months, 6 months. Yeah. But we 100%, as you've seen, use video because that's a learning tool. And sometimes we have to reframe on not just the what we're looking at, but also the environment of the session, and the session creates the learning, and how we deliver the coaching cues, and whether the player can actually solve the problem. Because as we said, that, you know, there's so many different variables, and especially being a goalkeeper, you've got influences from behind you in the crowd and saving the ball and etc. Then visually, you know, recording the games is, that's a great tool. And what we'd actually do is draw pictures and ask questions at that level. So we used Huddle. And my private business, I have an analyst, and he videos all the training sessions, and I'll draw pictures or ask questions at a certain time. So there's open learning. Yeah. Do you coach?
Great, yeah. So coach and lead the sports science program at the academy.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
So that's why I've got so many questions.